Take those cuffs off him." The voice echoed from the back of the courtroom, calm yet commanding, and for a brief second, every conversation stopped. The ceiling fans continued their slow rotation. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. But inside courtroom 4B of Norfolk County Justice Center, something had shifted. Marcus Reed sat alone at the defense table, his wrists secured in steel restraints, his posture straight despite the weight pressing down from every direction. At 38 years old, Marcus looked nothing like the image many people in the room had already formed in their minds. He wore a simple gray button-down shirt, neatly pressed despite the long night he had spent in custody. His dark eyes remained steady, focused not on the judge, not on the reporters lining the back wall, but somewhere far beyond the room itself. Around him, whispers floated through the air like dust caught in sunlight. Some people glanced at him with suspicion, others with curiosity. Most had already decided who he was before hearing a single word. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near the prosecution table, arms folded tightly across his chest. His polished badge reflected the harsh courtroom lighting. Every few moments he glanced toward Marcus with the quiet confidence of a man who believed the case was already finished. To Daniel, the story was simple. A disturbance at Harbor Point Mall. A confrontation. Witness statements. Security footage. An arrest. End of discussion. The local news stations certainly agreed. Since the previous evening, Marcus's face had appeared across television screens and social media feeds throughout the region. Headlines flashed beneath his photograph. Questions became assumptions. Assumptions became conclusions. By sunrise, thousands of strangers believed they already knew the truth. Marcus never corrected them. He never called reporters, never argued with officers, never demanded special treatment. Even now, sitting beneath the seal of the Commonwealth, he remained silent. The judge adjusted her glasses and reviewed several pages resting on the bench before her. The clock mounted above the courtroom doors ticked steadily toward 10 o'clock. Nearby, a silver-haired woman sat quietly in the gallery. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn leather purse against her chest. She had arrived before anyone else. She had watched every minute of the proceedings without speaking. More than once, she looked toward Marcus as though carrying a secret too heavy to keep any longer. Yet she remained seated. Yet she remained silent. Outside the tall courtroom windows, dark clouds drifted across the Virginia sky. The morning sunlight faded behind them, leaving the room washed in cold gray light. The atmosphere felt heavier now, tighter, as though the building itself was holding its breath. The judge finally looked up. "We are prepared to proceed," she announced. Chairs creaked. Papers shuffled. Reporters lifted their pens. Officer Brooks allowed himself a small smile. Everything was moving exactly as expected. Then the courtroom doors opened. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough for a uniformed officer to step inside and whisper something toward the bailiff. The bailiff's expression changed immediately. His eyes widened. He turned toward the judge. And for the first time that morning, uncertainty entered the room. Nobody noticed Marcus lift his eyes toward the doorway. But whatever he saw there caused the faintest change in his expression. Not fear. Not relief. Recognition. And a moment later, every person inside courtroom 4B would understand why. Long before anyone in that courtroom knew his name, Marcus Reed had mastered the art of being invisible. The newspapers called him many things now. Suspect. Aggressor. Man under investigation. But none of those labels resembled the life he had actually built for himself. Every morning at 5:30, while most of Norfolk was still asleep, Marcus arrived at the waterfront maintenance yard overlooking the Elizabeth River. The air usually carried the scent of salt water and engine fuel. Cargo ships moved slowly through the harbor, while seagulls circled overhead beneath pale morning skies. Marcus preferred those early hours. They were quiet, predictable, honest. He spent his days inspecting loading platforms, repairing damaged railings, replacing worn electrical fixtures, and keeping the aging structures along the docks functioning safely. It was not glamorous work, but he took pride in it. The younger workers respected him. The supervisors trusted him. Yet almost nobody knew much about his past. Whenever conversations drifted toward military service, Marcus found a reason to change the subject. When coworkers asked about the faded scars on his hands, he simply smiled and returned to work. He never displayed photographs, never hung awards on his walls, never attended veterans events. The small apartment he rented sat above a family-owned hardware store nearly 4 miles from the harbor. The place was modest. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen with aging cabinets, a second-hand recliner positioned beside a bookshelf filled with weathered novels and history books. The only decoration in the entire apartment was a framed photograph resting on a shelf near the window. 6 young men stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a desert sunset. Their uniforms were covered in dust. Their expressions carried the quiet confidence of people who trusted one another completely. Marcus rarely looked at the photograph for long. Some memories were easier to carry when left undisturbed. On most evenings, he stopped at the same diner 2 blocks from home. The waitresses knew his order before he sat down. Grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, black coffee. He tipped generously and never stayed longer than necessary. To the people around him, Marcus seemed like a man content with simplicity. A man who wanted nothing from the world except peace. The truth was more complicated. Certain sounds still pulled him backward without warning. A helicopter overhead. Fireworks on summer holidays. The sudden crack of construction equipment near the shipyards. Sometimes he would pause for a moment, stare into the distance, and wait for the feeling to pass. Then he would continue walking as though nothing had happened. Nobody saw those moments. Nobody asked questions. That was exactly how Marcus preferred it. The less people knew, the easier life became. Yet less than 48 hours before he found himself sitting in courtroom 4B, something had interrupted that carefully built routine. Something unexpected had happened at Harbor Point Mall. A crowded Saturday afternoon. Hundreds of shoppers moving between stores beneath bright skylights and polished floors. Marcus had only stopped there to pick up replacement work gloves before heading home. It should have been an ordinary errand. A 10-minute stop. Nothing more. Instead, by sunset, patrol cars had arrived. Witnesses had gathered. Phone cameras had appeared. And the quiet life Marcus Reed had spent years protecting began slipping away faster than he could stop it. Even now, sitting beneath the cold courtroom lights, he understood one truth better than anyone else in the room. The story everyone believed was missing the most important part. Saturday afternoons at Harbor Point Mall were usually loud but harmless. Families drifted between department stores carrying shopping bags. Teenagers gathered near the food court beneath bright banners and polished skylights. The smell of pretzels, coffee, and fresh popcorn floated through the wide corridors. It was the kind of ordinary American weekend scene nobody remembered the next day. Marcus Reed entered through the east entrance shortly after 3 o'clock. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a navy windbreaker with the logo of the dock maintenance company stitched above the pocket. His only goal was to replace a pair of worn work gloves before Monday morning. The hardware store inside the mall carried the exact model he preferred. 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out, then home. At least that was the plan. Less than 200 yards away, Officer Daniel Brooks was finishing a community patrol assignment. Daniel had spent nearly 12 years wearing a badge. He believed experience had taught him how to read people quickly. Sometimes he trusted those instincts more than actual facts. Fellow officers admired his confidence. Supervisors appreciated his efficiency. Yet there was a difference between confidence and certainty, and Daniel rarely noticed when one became the other. Earlier that afternoon, mall security had received reports of a disturbance involving an elderly woman who appeared frightened near one of the parking garage entrances. Witness descriptions were inconsistent. Some mentioned confusion. Others mentioned a disagreement. A few simply pointed toward a tall black man wearing work clothes. Those fragments traveled from one person to another until they slowly transformed into something larger. Security officers began searching. Daniel received a brief radio update. The information was incomplete. The assumptions were not. Meanwhile, Marcus had already purchased his gloves and was walking back toward the main corridor when he noticed movement near the north wing entrance. An elderly woman stood beside a bench, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked anxious, disoriented. Her silver hair moved slightly beneath the blast of cool air coming from the automatic doors. Nearby shoppers glanced at her but continued walking. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked whether she needed help. Marcus slowed his pace. Something about her expression reminded him of his grandmother years ago after she began experiencing memory problems. He hesitated for only a second before approaching. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently. The woman looked up. Relief immediately crossed her face. She nodded uncertainly but seemed overwhelmed. Before Marcus could learn what was wrong, several voices suddenly echoed from farther down the corridor. Security personnel were moving quickly through the crowd. People turned their heads. Cell phones appeared. Curious shoppers stepped aside. Within seconds, the atmosphere changed. What had been an ordinary afternoon now felt tense and unpredictable. Marcus noticed security officers looking directly toward him. Their pace increased. Nearby conversations stopped. The elderly woman's worried expression deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled. Then another voice spoke. Then another. Information traveled faster than truth. And before Marcus fully understood what was happening, the story about him had already begun taking shape inside the minds of people who had never spoken to him at all. The first security officer reached them within seconds. His radio crackled against his shoulder as he stepped between Marcus and the elderly woman. Two more officers followed close behind, scanning the crowd that had begun gathering along the corridor. Curious faces appeared everywhere. Shoppers slowed their pace. Store employees leaned from entrances. Phones rose quietly above heads. Marcus immediately stepped back to give the woman space. "Everything is fine," he said calmly. "I was just asking if she needed help." But the situation was already moving in a different direction. One of the security officers turned toward the woman. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. The woman opened her mouth to answer, but her gaze shifted nervously between the uniforms surrounding her. The attention seemed to overwhelm her. She hesitated. The pause lasted only a few seconds, yet it changed everything. Nearby witnesses interpreted her silence differently. Some assumed fear. Others assumed danger. Assumptions multiplied faster than facts. Officer Daniel Brooks arrived moments later. The crowd parted as he approached. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the tile floor. He listened briefly to his security supervisor, then turned his attention toward Marcus. Their eyes met for the first time. Daniel saw a tall man standing near a distressed elderly woman. He saw a gathering crowd. He saw uncertainty. What he did not see was the full story. "Sir, I need you to step over here," Daniel said. His voice remained professional, but firm. Marcus nodded immediately. "Of course, officer." He moved exactly where he was instructed. His hands remained visible. His posture stayed relaxed. The elderly woman suddenly looked alarmed. "No," she said softly. "That is not what happened." But her voice was nearly lost beneath the noise surrounding them. Several bystanders began speaking at once. One claimed they had seen an argument. Another said they thought the woman had looked frightened. A third admitted they had only arrived seconds earlier, but believed something serious had happened. Each statement added another layer of confusion. Daniel listened selectively, gathering pieces that seemed to support the picture already forming in his mind. Marcus remained patient. "Officer, I think there has been a misunderstanding," he explained. "I was trying to help her." Daniel studied him carefully. "Then we can sort that out." The words sounded reasonable. Yet the atmosphere no longer felt reasonable. The crowd had grown larger. Cameras continued recording. Every movement now seemed magnified beneath dozens of watchful eyes. The elderly woman tried again. This time her voice rose slightly. "He helped me find my purse," she said. "I was confused. I could not remember where I left it." Several people turned toward her. A few lowered their phones. For a brief moment, the tension appeared ready to dissolve. Then a mall employee hurried forward carrying a tablet. Security footage from one camera angle had been reviewed. The employee whispered something to Daniel. Whatever he heard caused his expression to harden. Marcus noticed the change immediately. The officer's posture shifted. His certainty increased. Somewhere inside that incomplete video clip, a crucial piece of context was missing. But nobody knew that yet. And as the crowd continued watching, the misunderstanding that should have ended in seconds was only beginning to grow. The tablet screen glowed beneath the bright mall lighting as Officer Daniel Brooks reviewed the footage. Around him, the crowd waited. Security officers watched closely. Reporters who had arrived after hearing scanner traffic lingered near the entrances, sensing a story before understanding it. Daniel replayed the clip once, then again. The video showed Marcus near the elderly woman. It showed him reaching toward her. It showed her stepping backward. Then the recording ended. No audio. No context. No explanation. Just a few seconds frozen inside a narrow camera angle. "That is enough for me," Daniel said quietly. Marcus looked toward the screen. Even from several feet away, he immediately recognized what was missing. The footage did not show the woman dropping her purse earlier. It did not show Marcus retrieving it from beneath a bench. It did not show him returning it to her moments before the clip began. Most importantly, it did not show her thanking him. The camera had captured the ending of an interaction while completely missing the beginning. Yet those few incomplete seconds suddenly carried more weight than everything else. "Officer, there are other cameras," Marcus said calmly. "You should review the full sequence." Daniel folded his arms. "We will review everything." His tone suggested the opposite. Nearby, the elderly woman stepped forward. "Please listen to me," she said. "This man helped me." Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were clear. Several people in the crowd exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time, doubt appeared on a few faces. But uncertainty rarely travels as quickly as accusation. One witness insisted Marcus had looked aggressive. Another admitted she had only seen part of the situation but believed something felt wrong. Someone else repeated information they had heard from another bystander. Each retelling drifted farther from the truth. Marcus stood quietly through all of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. His calmness seemed to frustrate some people even more. Daniel studied him carefully. There was something unusual about the man's composure. Most people became defensive under public scrutiny. Most people tried desperately to convince others of their innocence. Marcus simply stood there, steady and controlled, as though he had experienced far greater pressure long before this day. The officer interpreted that calm differently. To him, it looked rehearsed. The crowd continued growing. Store managers gathered near the entrances. Families paused their shopping trips to watch. Cell phone cameras remained fixed on Marcus. Within minutes, short clips began appearing online. Comments flooded social media. Strangers hundreds of miles away started forming opinions based on fragments measured in seconds. Meanwhile, the elderly woman seemed increasingly distressed. She gripped her purse tightly and looked from face to face. "Nobody is hearing me," she whispered. Marcus heard her. For the first time, sadness crossed his expression. Not for himself, for her. Because he understood exactly what was happening. The truth was standing in plain sight, yet everyone seemed more interested in the version that fit their assumptions. Then another security officer approached Daniel, carrying fresh information from the operations center upstairs. Daniel listened carefully. His jaw tightened. When he turned back toward Marcus, the atmosphere changed again. Whatever update he had received convinced him that the situation was about to become far more serious than anyone expected. The update from the operations center should have helped clear the confusion. Instead, it seemed to deepen it. Officer Daniel Brooks listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable as the security supervisor quietly explained that additional camera footage existed but had not yet been fully processed. Several camera angles from the north wing had experienced delays while files were being transferred from the central server. The complete sequence was unavailable for immediate review. For Marcus Reed, the explanation confirmed exactly what he had suspected from the beginning. Somewhere inside those missing minutes was the truth. Yet truth had become secondary to perception. Around them, the mall continued operating. Store music drifted softly through the corridor. Children carried shopping bags. Escalators hummed in the distance. Life moved forward as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet inside the growing circle of attention surrounding Marcus, time felt strangely suspended. Daniel glanced toward the crowd. More reporters had arrived. Local news crews positioned cameras near the entrances. What had begun as a misunderstanding was evolving into something larger. Public pressure was building. Expectations were forming. People wanted answers immediately, even if the facts were incomplete. The elderly woman sat down carefully on a nearby bench. Her shoulders looked heavier now. She seemed exhausted by the effort of repeating herself. Every few minutes, she tried again to explain what had actually happened, but her voice struggled to compete against the noise surrounding her. Marcus noticed her frustration. He also noticed something else. She reminded him of many people he had met throughout his life. Good people whose words were overlooked simply because they lacked authority. People who spoke the truth but were forced to watch louder voices control the narrative. A younger officer approached Marcus with a bottle of water. "You have been very cooperative, sir," he said quietly. Marcus accepted the bottle with a nod. "Thank you." The officer hesitated. Most people would be angry right now. Marcus looked toward the skylights overhead. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the glass, casting pale rectangles across the polished floor. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought. "Anger does not always help," he replied. The officer studied him curiously before stepping away. Nearby, Daniel continued receiving updates through his radio. Each transmission seemed to increase the pressure weighing on him. He believed he was protecting public safety. He believed he was acting responsibly. Yet uncertainty had begun creeping into the edges of his confidence. The elderly woman's account remained consistent. Marcus remained calm. The missing footage remained unavailable. Nothing fit together as neatly as it had an hour earlier. As afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, shadows lengthened across the mall corridors. The crowd thinned slightly, but cameras remained. Questions remained. Assumptions remained. And through it all, Marcus stood quietly at the center of a story he could not control. He never demanded sympathy, never asked for recognition, never mentioned the experiences that had taught him patience under pressure. Instead, he simply waited. Because somewhere beyond the confusion, beyond the headlines, beyond the opinions forming across television screens and social media feeds, the complete truth still existed. The only question was whether it would arrive before the damage became impossible to undo. Back in courtroom 4B, the uncertainty that had settled over the room only deepened. The bailiff stepped closer to the judge and whispered several words that nobody else could hear. Reporters immediately leaned forward. Officer Daniel Brooks straightened his posture. The silver-haired woman in the gallery gripped her purse even tighter. Then the courtroom doors opened wider. Every conversation stopped. A group of uniformed Navy officers entered first, their dark dress uniforms immaculate beneath the fluorescent lights. Gold insignias reflected softly as they moved down the center aisle. Behind them walked a tall man with silver hair and the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to command. For stars gleamed from his shoulders. Admiral Robert Hayes. The reaction was immediate. The judge stood. The bailiff stood. Attorneys stood. Nearly everyone in the courtroom rose to their feet without being asked. Only Marcus remained seated at the defense table, his expression unchanged. For the first time that morning, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Officer Brooks's face. Admiral Hayes did not acknowledge the reporters. He did not glance toward the cameras. His eyes were fixed on one person alone, Marcus Reed. The room fell silent as the Admiral approached the front of the courtroom. The sound of polished shoes against the hardwood floor echoed through the stillness. Even the reporters stopped typing. Nobody understood why one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy had suddenly appeared in a local courtroom. The Admiral stopped only a few feet from Marcus. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Admiral Hayes drew in a slow breath and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was calm, but carried effortlessly through the room. "Before these proceedings continue, this court deserves information that should have been presented long ago." Every eye in the room shifted toward him. Officer Brooks felt his stomach tighten. The Admiral removed a thick folder from beneath his arm. Its cover carried official military markings. He placed it carefully on the prosecution table. "The man sitting before you is not merely a civilian maintenance worker," he continued. "He is a retired naval special warfare operator whose service record remains one of the most distinguished I have encountered during my career." A murmur spread through the gallery. Reporters exchanged stunned looks. Pens immediately returned to paper. The Admiral opened the folder and removed several documents. For 14 years, Marcus Reed served his country in missions that remain classified to this day. He received multiple commendations for leadership, courage, and the protection of both military personnel and civilians. The silence became almost unbearable. Marcus lowered his eyes toward the table. He looked uncomfortable rather than proud, as though he wished none of this were being discussed. Admiral Hayes noticed. His voice softened. "That sounds exactly like him." A few people looked confused. The Admiral nodded toward Marcus. Because the most important thing about his service was never what he accomplished. It was what he refused to take credit for afterward. Officer Brooks felt the room shifting around him. The story he thought he understood was beginning to collapse. And then the Admiral revealed one final detail that caused every person in courtroom 4B to freeze. 21 years ago, he said quietly, "My life depended on decisions made by Marcus Reed. I am standing here today because of him." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the reporters seemed to forget their cameras for a moment. Admiral Robert Hayes stood beside the defense table, his weathered hand resting lightly on the folder containing Marcus Reed's service record. Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks felt every confident assumption he had made begin to unravel. The Admiral slowly turned another page. "There is more," he said. His voice remained calm, but emotion now lingered beneath the surface. "This morning, before arriving here, I requested a full review of every available piece of evidence connected to this case." He nodded toward the courtroom clerk. Within seconds, a monitor near the judge's bench illuminated. Additional security footage from Harbor Point Mall appeared on the screen. This time, the recording began several minutes earlier than the clip that had spread across news broadcasts and social media. The courtroom watched in complete silence as the elderly woman appeared near a bench, looking confused and distressed. Moments later, her purse slipped unnoticed to the floor. Several shoppers passed without seeing it. Then Marcus entered the frame. He spotted the purse immediately. The video showed him picking it up and walking toward the woman. It showed her expression change from worry to relief. It showed her smiling. It showed her thanking him. Then it showed something nobody had seen before. Marcus remained beside her because she appeared disoriented. He spoke calmly while helping her locate information she needed. The interaction lasted several minutes. Nothing about it resembled the narrative that had consumed local headlines. When the footage ended, the courtroom remained completely still. The elderly woman lowered her head and quietly wiped away tears. "I tried to tell them," she whispered. Officer Brooks stared at the screen. His face had lost all color. The certainty he once carried had vanished. Admiral Hayes closed the folder and turned toward him. There was no anger in his expression, no hostility, only disappointment. "Good people can make mistakes," the Admiral said quietly. "The danger begins when we stop listening." The words seemed to hang in the air. Brooks swallowed hard. He looked toward Marcus for the first time without suspicion. What he saw was not the man described by headlines, not the image created by incomplete footage. He saw a man who had remained respectful despite being misunderstood at every step. A man who had never once tried to humiliate anyone in return. The judge adjusted her glasses and reviewed the newly presented evidence. Her ruling came quickly. The case could not proceed. The allegations were dismissed. The courtroom exhaled as though it had been holding its breath for hours. Then something unexpected happened. Admiral Hayes stepped directly in front of Marcus Reed. Before reporters, before attorneys, before every person in attendance. "Marcus," he said softly, "on behalf of those who failed to see the full truth, I am sorry." The room froze once again. Marcus looked at the Admiral for several seconds before finally speaking. His voice was calm, steady, unchanged by everything that had happened. "Sir," he replied, "the truth arrived. That is what matters." And somehow those simple words carried more dignity than every headline written about him combined. The courthouse steps glowed beneath the soft gold light of late afternoon. The storm clouds that had covered the city earlier had finally drifted away, leaving behind a clear Virginia sky stretched wide above Norfolk. Reporters crowded near the entrance, cameras ready, microphones raised, eager to capture reactions and headlines. Yet the moment Marcus Reed emerged through the courthouse doors, something unexpected happened. The noise faded. Questions died before they were asked. People who only hours earlier had believed the worst now found themselves standing quietly as he walked past. Marcus moved with the same calm dignity he had carried from the beginning. No anger, no celebration, no demand for recognition. Just the steady pace of a man eager to return to an ordinary life. Behind him, Admiral Robert Hayes stepped outside and paused near the top of the stone staircase. Several Navy officers joined him. The American flag mounted above the courthouse entrance shifted gently in the breeze. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The Admiral watched Marcus descend the steps toward the sidewalk below. Then, without announcing it, he raised his hand in a formal salute. The officers beside him immediately followed. The gesture was simple, respectful, deeply personal. Cameras captured the moment from every angle. Across the street, pedestrians stopped walking. Drivers waiting at the traffic light lowered their windows. Even some reporters forgot to record notes as they watched. Marcus noticed the movement behind him. He stopped near the bottom of the stairs and slowly turned. His eyes met the Admiral's. The city seemed strangely quiet. No speeches were necessary. No explanations remained. The truth had already spoken for itself. After several seconds, Marcus returned the salute. Then he lowered his hand and offered the faintest smile. Not a smile of victory, a smile of peace. The Admiral nodded once. It was enough. Nearby, Officer Daniel Brooks exited the courthouse carrying a folder beneath one arm. He looked older than he had that morning. The certainty that once defined him had been replaced by reflection. For a moment, he considered approaching Marcus. Before he could decide what to say, Marcus glanced toward him and gave a small nod. There was no resentment in the gesture, no accusation, only understanding. Daniel stood frozen. That simple act of grace affected him more than any criticism could have. Across the parking lot, the elderly woman from Harbor Point Mall waited beside her son's car. She smiled when she saw Marcus. This time he walked over and accepted the hug she offered. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus shook his head gently. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." As the sun lowered toward the horizon, long shadows stretched across the courthouse grounds. One by one, the crowds dispersed. Reporters packed away their equipment. Patrol cars departed. The city returned to its routine. Marcus climbed into his aging pickup truck and started the engine. The harbor awaited him on Monday morning. The docks would still need repairs. The cargo ships would still arrive before sunrise. And that was exactly how he wanted it. As he drove away beneath the fading light, the flag above the courthouse continued moving softly in the wind. Behind him stood people who would remember this day for years. Ahead of him stretched an ordinary road. And for Marcus Reed, after everything that had happened, ordinary felt like the greatest gift of all.